Test, test.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to just wait a few more minutes. I see some people are still signing on. Just to explain the format for this evening, this is a virtual meeting. We've opened the doors for the first time in City Hall since the pandemic, I believe, and we're going to allow no more than 10 people in, and we ask that people, when they come in, wear their masks, and please stay within 6 feet. If you're within 6 feet, please wear a mask. And we have questions that are being emailed to us, questions direct message over Facebook. We have questions over Zoom. And so we're going to take those questions. Mike DeVito's to the right. I'll introduce the panel in a second. There are a few ways to watch this webinar. You can watch it on Zoom as an attendee. You can watch it on Facebook Live, or you can watch it on the MGAT, which is the Milford Government Access Television. The purpose of our forum today is to allow Milford residents to ask questions from their police officials, and it's a wide group of topics, but we highlighted some of the topics that we think are important. Well, good evening, everyone. And those that are here today, thank you for coming. And to those that are listening in, welcome. Tonight's forum is about policing in the 21st century. And before I begin, I'd like to just introduce the panelists here this evening. Myself, I'm Keith Mello. I'm the Chief of Police of the City of Milford. And I actually will go around the room. Brian?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brian Roje. I'm the Deputy Chief of the City of Milford.
Good evening, everybody. Garen Domati, Lieutenant with the Milford Police Department.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Officer Kenton Brooks with the Milford Police Department Patrol.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Officer Anna Neo with the Milford Police Department. I'm the Crime Prevention Officer.
Agree? Okay. We also have with us tonight Officer Bree McDonald, who will be here to help us with questions in the audience. So thank you, everyone, for coming. And let me just begin for the reason that we're here. You know, it's always important that law enforcement listen to the community. And this is an unusual time, the fact that we're doing this virtually, but it's an important time, and we felt that this couldn't wait. And we are here because we are all deeply disturbed by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. There's been a lot that I've said. We've issued statements and we've spoken to the media, but we need to really start to get to work, and it needs to be more than talk. But for us up here at this end of the room, to see somebody take the life for nearly 9 minutes of another human being wearing a uniform, and that has it's beyond disturbing for all of us. Yeah, in the subsequent outpouring of outrage and protests throughout the country, and protests that we've had right here. It's important that we listen and that we hear from all the voices. Now, remember something about Milford, and I've said this many times. We police everyone, not just those that live here, not just those that work here, but anyone that frequents Milford, that drives through Milford, that visits Milford. And law enforcement is unique in that sense. Unlike any other city, state, municipal department, we provide services to everyone. And so I think with that, it's important to remember that it's not enough that Milford is not a community where we have had complaints or we have had misconduct. None of that. We are all law enforcement, and we are responsible for this entire profession. And so with that responsibility, we are here today to take questions from the audience, take questions virtual, and so we encourage you to please send those in. We're watching Facebook Live, we're watching Zoom, and I think we're monitoring our email. Okay, very good, thank you. Mike DeVito, if the first question, please.
The first question, Chief. What kind of training do police officers get? Because it seems like they need a lot more training.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad whoever sent that in asked that question. Let me take the latter part first. Absolutely, they need more training. And we have our own training academy here in Milford, and anyone that's spoken to me knows that I say every day is a training day, and we are constantly asking for more training. Those that have listened to our budget hearings have heard me say, cut anything but training, because you can't have enough training. But training needs to also be meaningful. You can't just put hours to that training. It needs to be a significant emotional event. So because otherwise we train every year, and we train the same subjects every year. But I have to think that sometimes people walk away from that training without really remembering the history behind some of those events and the reason that we're here. So we need to not only provide more training, but improve our training. But let's talk about the training that a police officer gets, because I think it's important for our residents to know that. A police officer in Connecticut, through basic recruit training, gets 880 hours of recruit training and an additional 400 hours of field training. So we're talking nearly 1,300 hours of training before they can take their first call, before they start getting additional training from their departments on policies and protocols. And that training is continuous. You're required by law to get 60 hours every 3 years. I know in this department we average about 70 to 80 hours a year in additional training. So we took this, as a member of the Post Council, we did an evaluation in 2015 and again in 2018, and we did a review of our curriculum. And we focused on a number of things, but we focused primarily on the human relations piece that talks about things like conflict resolution, communication skills, cultural diversity, fair and impartial policing, implicit bias. And so we used President Obama's 21st Century Task Force report as our foundation. And in particular, there was a member of that task force, Sue Rear, that was the director of the Washington State Police Academy. And so, to many, that was the premier law enforcement training program in the country. We sent our entire curriculum up to Washington, and we had them compare and contrast what we do compared to what they do. And they sent back a letter in November of 2018 saying that your academy program either meets or exceeds ours. But there's a few things that you need to do. And so now we're doing those things, and we've added those subjects on to increase the hours. We have, I believe, if not more, very close to the highest number of recruit training hours in the country, which is the hourly equivalent of 2 years of college. But hours aren't really enough. It's about the quality of that instruction. And it begins with the quality of the people that we send up there. And those that are in the Recruit Academy know that we say this all the time. It's largely dependent upon what you send up to us in the first place. Our training hours, we're currently under another training review. It's an ongoing process. We are really focusing on ways to prevent the use of force, looking at different outcomes. The use of force is unfortunately always going to be present in policing in our society. Training is now centered around how to avoid that. And that's something that's only been in place about 4 or 5 years, where we really put a focus on I mean, it's always been there, but we really put a focus on the success is avoiding that use of force in the first place, because nothing good comes out of a use of force. It's ugly, it never looks good, and people are normally, including police officers, are often hurt. So we're proud of our training program, you know, and I'm hearing people talk about divest in police and defund police. I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be, but I would offer that training is the last place that we should be looking to defund or abolish. I would say that that's the one area that we need to invest. Anyone on the panel have anything else they want to add to that? Mike?
Chief, what do you feel about the putting your SROs back into school if there is actual school this fall?
Well, let me just say this about the SRO program. The SROs, as many of you know, I think they mean different things in different communities. This community had a need or felt the need for SROs, followed by what happened in Newtown. Now, other communities have had SROs for a long time. We didn't. We added them right after Newtown. And it was our belief that we wanted to engage with kids. We do a lot with kids, and people on this panel know that because you do a lot with kids. It's probably one of the most enjoyable parts of this job. And parents felt the need to, they wanted to feel safer. The school staff, their employees felt having a police officer in the school made them feel safer. And so while it was centered around protecting kids, for us it was all about having access to young people so we could set a positive example and develop relationships that would hopefully you know, pay dividends for us and for our community throughout the years. Garen, to my left here, was an SRO, so I'll turn it over to him in a second and get his comment. But my position on SROs, and this is a choice that each municipality needs to make. The school district, the elected officials need to determine whether or not SROs are right for their community. They may not be, and I understand that. And so in terms of my opinion, whether there should be SROs in school, I'll leave that for those for parents, for school administrators, and for elected officials. Garen, did you have anything to add on SROs?
Well, of course I do, Chief. I'm very partial to the SRO program, and SROs are really highly trained and learn how to function within a school environment. I started at West Shore Middle School in 2012, and when I entered the school, I know there were a lot of questions of why are the police here, what is their function, what are they going to do, et cetera, and things like that. And here I am 8 years later, almost removed from that position, and I still keep in touch with families and students that I've met along the way. And contrary to what some of the belief is, SROs are able to actually intervene in a student's life before an arrest or a court appearance may have to be necessary to modify their types of behavior, when they get in trouble and things like that. SROs engage in restorative practice and restorative justice along with the Board of Ed, and they're able to act as role models for kids before things come down the criminal end of the pipeline, so it's called.
Okay. Thank you. So I just want to add about SROs. The idea was they were supposed to prevent, and they are supposed to prevent a traditional law enforcement response, and they're not supposed to be involved in school discipline. That's the last thing. So I would have a stronger opinion if I felt that was happening here, and if it does happen here, it's not going to happen here, because I don't think that's healthy for children. But again, I'll leave that to others. And so right now, I'm proud that our SRO program works, but I certainly understand if our community feels that that's not a program they want to invest in anymore. Thank you. Michael?
Chief, do you have any testing in place, any psychological testing in place that could possibly do now racialized fires and police officers?
Yeah, if only, right? So for those that don't know, for those that are listening, to be a police officer in Connecticut, you have to undergo, by law, a battery of tests. And it starts with a background investigation, and similar to many other jobs where you go out to the former employer and you talk to witnesses, neighbors. But part of the most important part of that, I think, is the polygraph examination, and followed by the psychological. In fact, we lose here in Milford, 80% of our applicants don't make it. And there are others where we are, but we're one of the highest when it comes to that. And it's normally the psychological or the polygraph. So you go through a polygraph, that information is then sent over to the psychologist. And the psychologists, we've had a few that we've used. We've had one we've been using quite a bit, and we've been in contact with her recently. They go through a battery of personality tests. And those things are measured like cultural sensitivity and other important factors in a personality that might prevent them from being a police officer, that might have a propensity to be too emotional or to result to violence. That information, along with the polygraph results, are then sent over to the psychologist, and the psychologist then does a historical background and examination, an interview. Those results are given to us in a document, and then we take those and then we measure those. And so in a polygraph, for us here in Milford, a veracity issue is a no-go. Even if it's something that was minor that wouldn't preclude them from being a police officer, if you lie, we don't take you. And the same thing on the polygraph. And the polygraph, the same thing on the psychological. If the psychological shows any propensity for unusual or harmful behavior, then we don't take them. And then once in a while, and I can only recall twice since I've been chief, the last thing you do before you get hired after you've passed everything is you sit down with an interview with me. And I've had I asked you some basic questions. You're not being scored, but every so often somebody says something that I think is just unusual. And so for that reason, they won't be hired. And they have a right to appeal, and they can appeal through the Board of Police Commissioners, and there are 7 appointed civilians. Is everything all right? Everything's okay, right? Oh, okay. So that's the process. I wish the process was better. I'm certainly open to suggestions. We spend a lot of money. We're always looking for something better. There's been questions, and Mike, I don't know what kind of questions you have, but there's been questions regarding, and I sit on the task force, the legislative task force for police accountability and transparency. And one of the things that we brought up during that task force was, should police officers have to go for a psychological evaluation every year? And that's yet to be determined. But is there a model out there that has a better track record of rooting out biases that are harmful, rooting out potential deviant behavior? So that's what we use. So that's the answer to that question. Anything can be better, and if there's anyone listening on this call that has a suggestion, we're certainly all ears, because it's something that we look. Once you hire a police officer, you for the most part, unless that police officer commits serious misconduct, he or she is with you for a long time. The most important part of that process is to try to weed out people that aren't going to be successful, that can damage the reputation of your community, of your police department. So thank you for the question, whoever sent it. Mike?
Next question is 2 parts, Chief. They are related. How are cops investigated for using force or doing, incorrect things? This is their quote. Is it true that it's impossible to fire a bad cop? And do you have any cops that you would like to fire right now, if you could? Maybe it's 3 parts. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Can I have the first part again?
How are cops investigated for using force or other bad things, which I guess they're assuming that force is bad.
Okay. All right, so let me take that in the first question first. So in Milford, like most police departments, we have an internal affairs unit. Garen Del Monte is in charge of that internal affairs unit that works directly right next to me down the hall. Anytime there's a use of force, and in Milford, unlike maybe some agencies, we investigate everything. We investigate a physical touch. Even though it's not force, if I grab Brian and say, Brian, come on, you have to leave, and I put my hands on him, that's a review. And that review, if it was force, will then go on to a use of force investigation, and it goes up through the chain. Evidence is presented, body cam footage is looked at. If it's a use of force, we look for the video that's located in so many stores and roadways. And then that information is put together, and then it comes to me. So let me give you an example of when somebody uses force. And this is every time. There's always a better way. Nobody's perfect. There's no perfect scenario. I'm sure when men and women see themselves on Facebook or they see this video, they probably say, I could have handled that better. And so we look at it for ways to, how do we address that? And so what we did here in Milford is we created a separate training unit last year to do nothing but look at use of force to make sure that our police officers not only had the tools, knew how to use the tools, but that everything that we did started with de-escalation. Everything we did. And if I send you back to the minutes of the police commission or the minutes of the post council, I've said this for 3 years. And as a result, we made changes here, we made changes at the post council and recruit training. Every time you talk about using force, it needs to begin with de-escalation, and it needs to be a cultural shift where people understand that avoiding the use of force is success. And that you have to look at any time you have to use force, even if it was unavoidable, that becomes a failure, and how do you prevent that failure? And anytime you look at a use of force, how can we handle this better? Could we have de-escalated it? Could we have stepped back? And you're dealing with human beings, and they all manage things differently, and they all have different emotions. And so we have a dedicated unit to do that. In Connecticut last year, there was a law passed where all use of force, as defined by the state, has to be reported to OPM. And there's a form, it's on the Post website. And so that is now, has been since last year, last fall, being collected by the state and analyzed by OPM. Needless to say, we do that internally. I'm sorry, in the second part of the question? Let me just, and that has to, so whenever we're talking about misconduct, not just use of force, but use of force seems to be really the predominant topic here. That's how we handle any type of potential misconduct or any civilian complaint, whether it's anonymous, it doesn't matter how we got it. It doesn't matter if somebody said, and I can recall there was a ray gun in someone's house and you didn't go after the ray gun. Well, I don't know what that ray gun is, or maybe that meant something to someone else, but we're going to look into it. Michael, the second part.
The second part, and it's two-pronged, is it true that it's impossible to fire a bad cop? And do you have any cops that you would like to fire right now if you could?
So if I could open up a police department right next door, I would take most everyone. Most. Is it possible to fire a police officer? No. Is it very hard? Yes. Of course it is. But at the same time, there are union contracts that have been negotiated for many, many years that offer protections and offer time limits and certain notifications. And the appeal, and that's due process, and everyone's entitled to due process. And then the appeal process is up at the State Labor Board. Am I happy? We're fortunate because we haven't, I think I've been up there once on something, and we prevailed. Are chiefs happy with that? No, absolutely not. If you ask chiefs what the number one change they'd like to see is the ability to be able to root out police officers they think don't belong. And not just people that commit misconduct. People that we really feel that this really isn't for them. People that we feel, when I ask a police officer, hey, how is this affecting you? And you recall, because we've talked to everyone, and how does this affect you? You know, there are people protesting, and you know, there's, do you understand, you know, do you understand what they're saying, and how do you feel? You know, if it doesn't bother you, and you're not impacted by it, if it hasn't hit you somewhere inside, then maybe you don't belong in this job. That's not misconduct. But if I was running my own business and it was called the police department, yeah, there were some people I wouldn't take. And let me just offer this too about the labor board. I've had numerous conversations in the last few weeks, 3 today as a matter of fact, with legislators, and that is, there's another way. And there's another way instead of just using the labor board. Because while it's part of the due process, there has to be, for accountability, and I know that most police officers are okay with this, and at least they should be, and that is that you have to be able to, you should take responsibility for your actions, no matter how minor. You do something wrong, we teach our children that, you take responsibility. And we certainly don't want a culture where people think, well, I'll just take my chances with the labor board because I'll probably get it negotiated down, or I'll get my job back because you can't fire me. Not in this state. So there's another way. And the other way, I believe, and something that we're working on, and that is, we may not be able to take the job from somebody. Maybe that's not what we should look at. Maybe we should look at just removing their license to be a police officer. Because unlike what many people are saying, you have to have a license in Connecticut, and you've got to have a certain amount of training, and you've got to have a certain amount of retraining. And if you miss that, you're decertified. So maybe that's the case. See, in Connecticut, there's a program, a legislative program, that the Post Council can decertify someone. That is, take away their license to be a police officer if they commit some qualifying offenses. Now, those offenses right now, with the exception of the automatic disqualifiers for certain type of arrests or convictions, rather, those are automatic disqualifiers. I'm talking about somebody who commits a crime of veracity, tampering with evidence, or false statement. Same thing, veracity, where it has to meet certain elements. And that's why you'll see in Connecticut there's 75 officers that have been decertified, either through some sort of felony or arrest conviction or through the appeal process. And I think that that can be enhanced. And I think we need to specifically look at bias-related crimes, incidents rather, and excessive force. And so we have to determine what that is and what that looks like. I believe that'll happen. I believe it'll happen this short session. That's what police chiefs want. And I think that the message to police officers, this isn't a negotiated settlement. If you do this, you're not going to be a police officer anymore because we're going to pull your license. Mike, did I answer all three there?
You did, except for if there was an officer on your list that you would like to fire right now.
Well, I went the other way and said...
Yeah, I understand the way you answered it.
But let me say this, and this is important. For me, it's important. If I was going to open up a police department right next door, and I own that shop, I would take the vast, vast majority of these men and women back. Because these men and women are some of the finest men and women I've ever met. Now, nobody wants to hear that right now, but that's the truth. So I fight for police reforms, and I have a track record of doing that, and I'm going to do that now. But they're some of the finest men and women I've ever met. And, I see how this is affecting them, but that's a good thing, because it's resonating, and it needs to. But I watch the good work they do, and I know that almost all of them, probably all of them, would give their life for a total stranger, without exception. But that certainly doesn't mean that we don't hold each other accountable. Thank you.
You've basically, I think you've touched on this again, but it is a separate question. The question is, how can we get rid of the unions? Because I think that they protect the bad cops, and that is obviously from the questionnaire.
Well, again, unions are, these are legally organized labor groups who have a legally negotiated contract, and so they're entitled to those rights, and they're entitled to due process, and they're entitled to an appeal process. Do I think, in my experience watching other departments, that there's a propensity to side with with labor? Absolutely. I don't know what the answer is to that. But in my view, that should change. But that's my, 10,000 feet view on things. But let me just say this too, and let's be fair to the unions as well, because unions are essential and they're necessary. And there's a reason why. I mean, so much of what goes on is about history. When we look at history of labor in this country, in this state, there's a reason why unions started. And so there's a reason why they exist. So I'm not going to union bust, but I do have some strong opinions as to some of the officers that probably shouldn't be working in this state. Michael, something else? I'm sorry, did anyone else have anything that they wanted to offer regarding unions? Or actually, I'm sorry, we're the only ones that aren't in a union, so that would be inappropriate. I apologize.
I hear a lot about changes, but we like our police. What kind of changes are going to happen? What do you think should happen?
Well, again, I sit on the task force for police transparency and education. That task force has been in place since 2018. It should have had a report finished in January 2020. It didn't. I'm sorry, it should have met all 2019. But nevertheless, we're meeting now every other week. It's a group, it's a legislative task force, and the party leaders all had, legislative leaders all had appointments, and I was appointed by one of those. And there's 20 recommendations that are in there, and those recommendations in large part are based upon the President Obama's 21st Century Task Force on Policing, which is a really good document. I think people, the more they look at it, even though it's a little dated now, said, you know what, this is kind of ahead of its time. Let me refer to the 8 Can't Wait. And we looked at 8 Can't Wait. We looked at reforms. I just looked at some states that passed these sweeping reforms. Well, we've already done those things. And so while there's always more that can be done, there's a lot that's already been done. But what do I think will happen? I think everything is on the table as it should be. I don't know that law enforcement is opined in anything in large part, other than there are things that we think would be helpful, but we haven't got into kind of the nuts and bolts. We're waiting to see. We saw what came out of the governor's recommendations. We're waiting to see what comes out of the Judicial Committee. We kind of have a pretty good idea. In fact, I think I brought a document with me somewhere, if I could find it, where some of the things that they had recommended. And if I can find it, I'll go back to it. And everything from their civilian review boards. Now, many municipalities have a form of that. They have civilian police commissioners that aren't police officers, know nothing about policing, that hear every discipline. And there are the appeal process for any complaints. I think that's important. In my view, I think every organization should have that. We have it here. I like the fact that I can send all of my stuff over to them and have 7 people dissect it, ask questions. If I can't convince 7 people this was right, then it probably wasn't. So I think that's something that it certainly has a lot of value. Civilian review boards or a body to review deadly force on a state level, whether or not that should be somewhere else other than chief states, that's something on the table. There's a number of things regarding police accountability. I like our idea of the police, of the decertification. There's 20 things, or actually there's 22 now, so I don't want to go through there. There is a part in there where one of the recommendations was a police officer and a candidate for police officer spend 500 hours working in an urban community or a fragile community to have that experience. So that's on the table as well. So there's a number of things that are going to be discussed and dissected, including how to best navigate through the the labor process.
I believe that officers experience traumatic events on such a regular basis that there should be some requirement for them to maintain training to help with their mental health, and that would be for everyone's benefit.
Okay. Mike, I'm sorry. Can I ask you just to repeat that? Because did you say regular mental health?
Yes. The questionnaire, he or she believes that officers experience and go through traumatic events.
That's true. Okay.
And therefore,
I
they
understand.
should be, they should have their mental health attended to as well, and there should be some requirement for maintaining their mental health through training.
So I talked about that a little before. And one of the things that we do, if we have an incident with somebody, it could be a driving incident, where we will negotiate with our union to send them to a psychological evaluation, because we think that's important. Whether or not it needs to happen annually, I'm not going to really opine on that, because I don't know what the outcome of the testing could be. If there's a test out there that can determine if somebody becomes engages in, or will likely engage in deviant behavior or biased behavior or aggressive behavior, if there's a test out there, then I think it would have value. That's something, though, that needs to be answered by the mental health community. But absolutely, police officers, they do experience PTSD. They see traumatic incidents. I mean, just the fact that I told you before, use of force is always ugly. It never looks good. It's just never going to look good. And somebody's going to get hurt. Probably both people are going to get hurt. And violence isn't pretty, and that can play on a police officer. So those can be traumatic events. And certainly homicides and sexual assaults, things dealing with children. And so if the question is centered around that we should continually be reevaluated, we actually do that, but it's more voluntary. And we as supervisors and the staff will tell you that. We'll often suggest and sometimes insist that you go and you be examined. We have an employee assistance program here and access to mental health resources here in Milford, and we use it quite a bit. Anyone want to add to that? Sure.
So as far as the availability for our police officers and our staff to employee assistance programs, emotional support, training opportunities for resilience, we have a pretty robust template in place. Usually it's incident specific. So if something happens that's over the top traumatic and kind of shocks the human, our job as a staff is to make sure that all of our employees, whether they're sworn employees, police officers, staff members alike, know that they have all of this available to them. So we have this robust template, a lot of different options available to them, and the staff makes sure that, especially if there's something incident specific that happens, we make sure to remind them that these opportunities are available to them.
Thank you. Mike, I have a couple questions here. I don't know if these came from the audience or these came over. Okay. Bree, if we can just take a moment, just a brief intermission. Can you see if anyone in the audience has a question, if we can write that down? And then I'm going to go to a few questions that we got off of Facebook Messenger. Anyone? Okay. So then I'm going to go right to Facebook Messenger, if you don't mind. Again, if you want something, just get Bree's attention if anyone comes in or changes their mind. And Michael, I'm going to read this question, if you don't mind. Are there protections for one police officer who stops or wants to stop another police officer if he or she is abusing her authority? There's two questions here, and the answer is yes. So I know there's some attorneys in here, and so the whole idea of intervening and reporting is nothing new, and it was nothing new for those officers in Minnesota. There's sufficient Supreme Court case law that points out a police officer's duty to intervene. There isn't a police officer that knows that he or she doesn't have a duty to intervene and a duty to report. Not only are they trained that way, again, there's adequate case law. So the question is, does it happen, and does it happen enough? And does it happen when it really counts? And how do you impact that? So I want you to know that in our policy here in Milford, for those Milford folks that are listening, we have that in our policy. We state it, we restate it. And so what we did as a state through the post council is we met on an emergency meeting and we put into the mandatory accreditation standards, which means every municipal police department has to have that in their policy, and we audit to make sure that you don't. And if you don't, your mayor or first selectman is going to get a letter saying your department's out of compliance, and that is that you need to state to your officers a duty to intervene and a duty to report. And it goes into retaliation if an officer does report something like that. So absolutely, that's, I would imagine that you could even see that in a form of legislation, although I think it's already there. But I also think it's good to restate things to people. You know, you do with your children, you constantly tell your kids, don't do this, don't do that, so they hear it all the time, and I think that's part of what we do and what we should do. A second question of, do police officers have training in unconscious and conscious bias? The answer is yes. And in 2017, we added additional hours, and that's one of the most important areas of police training. You might remember here that we brought in some experts. We used the Parsons Complex, and so thank you. It's the type of training that you need to constantly have those refreshers. I think that the protests were probably some of the best training that our police officers can have because of the impact that they felt in their homes and with their neighbors and with each other, and they saw on TV. I think that is going to have, I think it's a seminal moment for police officers as well. But I think some of the best training that we've introduced in policing in a long time, and this is important, is impartial bias, right? Or excuse me, implicit bias. That is those, and anyone that says they don't, I think you need to do some soul searching. It's the biases that we have inside that are unconscious, but they come out when we're making decisions. They shape our decisions. They influence our decisions. And trying to really understand that and get into grips with those unconscious biases, and how do you manage and how do you keep those from creeping into your decisions? So one of the things we do is we tell our police officers, your emotions can't be a part of your decisions. Your biases, your anger, your emotion, and even fear. Now that's really hard when we're dealing with human interaction. It's so flawed. But that's what's centered around implicit bias training. And I think unconscious bias training is something that can't be overstated. Bree, did you have, okay, another question here. Mike, before we get to the questions, I have one more. I just have two more, but let me ask one more. Who pays the cost of misconduct settlements? Police budget or city general fund? Well, the police budget is the city general fund. It's all the same pool of money. Some departments, and I won't get into government, but many departments have a certain level of insurance. However, it's safe to say that the taxpayers bear that cost, regardless of what budget it comes out of or how much they pay on premiums. Mike?
Chief, cops always talk about how hard their job is and that nobody else understands it, but maybe another cop. Do you think that this is true?
Thank you. Yeah, I do, in a sense, but let me qualify that and put it in context. I think, I've served in the military, and I think those that serve in the military know what it's like to serve in the military. Others can assume they know, but nobody really knows. I think it's those, but I think it's an important question, and I think we could, if we examine that question, and if we say, and rightfully so to some extent, that a police officer knows better what it's like to be a police officer than anyone else. If we expect, if the premise of the question is to expect that people should understand us, then you can extend that we need to understand people that aren't like us, that haven't had our same experiences, that don't have have a different history. And with that comes a different perspective, right? When two people meet, they bring in those biases, those experiences, their history, things they've been told, things they've seen on TV. And so, yeah, of course, there's a lot of truth to that. And I don't know that now is the time to try to explain to people what it is like. Because I think the response would be, you need to learn about us. That's really our obligation. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think that this moment in history is going to help all of our police officers, especially those young men and women coming into this that really want to do right, that left their house a hero and came home a pariah. And for reasons that were probably under their control, being part of a system they didn't create. So I don't know if I answer the question, but I think it needs to be put in context. And I think that really lends itself to a continued conversation. But I think we have the obligation to understand others first, if that makes any sense. Mike, if you don't mind, Kent, you're a patrol officer, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and Mary Lisa, I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you comfortable answering that question at all? Can you get your mic too, please, in front of you? Thank you.
So the question was, I'm sorry, Mike, can I just have it again, please?
The question was, suppose it's often said that police officers, they fellow officers to understand their job, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, well, I think that we know, just being a part of something bigger than yourself, I think we do know. I think I can identify with other police and know how they feel, and whereas a person who has not been an officer wouldn't know. You know, we've all not been officers before, but only a select few of us have been now. So I agree with the chief. I think we have an obligation to understand other people first, and it's a thankless job, but in a sense, we do have to, or yes, I do agree that we understand each other more so, because we have similar experiences. You know, we spend a lot of time together, we train a lot together, so absolutely.
Thank you. Mike, I'd like to take, there's a couple good questions here. I'd like to turn to those if you don't mind. What additional community partners are the most important, and what partnerships would you like to see developed or more robust in the community in terms of community support to address underlying roots of people frequently involved in the Connecticut system? And this is a really good question. And if you, sure. I've been saying for many years, the crisis intervention teams are what really is needed in law enforcement. Now that represents an investment, not a defunding or a divestment. And what I mean by that is larger cities are starting to use that. You see it more prevalent. And I'm talking about when police officers have to go out and deal with situations that they've been trained, but you can't give a police officer 10 hours or 20 hours or 40 hours of mental health training and how to deal with people that have, that are suffering from substance abuse or problems in the home or have mental health issues. And so many of the people we deal with have mental health issues. You can't expect a police officer to have that same skill set as somebody who's got many years of educational and clinical experience that is far better suited to do that. Now, I disagree that the police, police officers shouldn't go, because we know there's criminality involved in a lot of that. Many times, those folks from fragile communities and that have disadvantages, both economically and employment and housing, they're often more likely to be victims of crime. Now, in an all-perfect world, those resources should be available to us 24 hours a day. And so I think crisis intervention teams, in this city, we have this holistic approach towards many things, right? We deal with the homeless. You've probably heard of how we handle the homeless. And we're kind of a model. And we receive a lot of complaints from the homeless, and people are going to call the police. But as we have taken away from social services, we expect the police to handle those, and we can't just throw hours at them and expect that they're going to be able to handle those as well as the 200 other things that they have to handle. So I don't know who gave me the question, but I like that question because we have the resources. We do need more of them, but it's not up to us to say. It's up to society to really decide how do we want this to look, and how do we improve on that model? I fear that it'll just continue to be put back on our shoulders. But nevertheless, we're prepared, and we're going to do our best. And, we're fortunate here. This is a community that supports their police department. And I'm talking about financial support. I told you before, I always say don't cut my budget for training, and I have a great training budget. We have a training academy. We have a whole school. We have simulators that we use to put police officers in real life situations to make decisions under stress, to see how they act. You know how many ever the police departments have that in the state? 0. We've put a lot into this. So thank you for the question. And I'd like to just take one more, because I think this one came from the audience as well. And comment on the resolutions passed by Bridgeport Police. Do we have any of those resolutions? If so, which ones? I'm sorry, but I don't know what resolutions we're talking about. If we're talking about action by the police department and by the community, this is action. And the second question is, do we plan on having these regular meetings? I'll have them if people will come. If one person comes, I'll have them. I'll have them with you in my office. I'm not afraid to talk, and neither are these gentlemen. Ladies, I'm sorry. Again, I'm not sure about the resolutions, but as I said in the beginning of this, and I'm not throwing shade at anyone, enough words. Action. I can point to action that we've done in the state. I can tell you what we're doing in response. I can tell you the conversations that we're having over legislation and meaningful change. I see this as an opportunity. I'm going to leverage the protests and the feeling from the public and the voices of the protesters to try to really improve the way we deliver our services. I'm going to go right back to, I care deeply about these people that work for me, deeply. And it's about protecting them too. And we have to make sure that we give them the tools, that we give them the training, and the guidance. And that's why I think some of these things can change that are some of these laws are ambiguous. We'll soon be rolling out a use of force policy in Milford that is going to be unlike any other city or town in the state. We're committed to doing that. So the answer to the question, I'm not sure what the resolutions are, but I think we'd like to try to follow it up with action. How are police trained in handling calls involving racism? And that's a good question. I'm not sure of the context, but I'm going to answer it my way, and if I'm wrong, whoever asked it, just please, you can correct me. So we talk about this all the time. We have been for years. Let me back up on that. From time to time, we're placed in situations that have unintended consequences, and they appear to be discriminatory. They're unintended consequences. And I know they're unintended because I've sat in where we've made some of these changes and these rules and these ordinances. And I know that in this city, we are very careful to make these rules and these ordinances so they don't have these unintended consequences, but sometimes it does. And if we receive a call in Milford, and we have in the past, and let me give you a scenario. Right? My sergeant said to me, I got a call about somebody at the beach, and they weren't doing anything wrong. But somebody called and said they don't belong there. And I went out and I asked the woman, can I have your ID? And she said, no, because I didn't do anything wrong. And he said, you know, you're right. And I'm speeding it up a little bit, but you're right. And he said, what am I supposed to do? I said, well, we're going to handle things a little different now. We're not going to that call. We'll go to the call, but we're not approaching that woman. And so if you call, we want to know, well, what are you doing? Why is it you're uncomfortable? What is that person doing wrong? Is it suspicious? Is it potential criminal activity? And so if we respond there and we see that there is nothing that represents a suspicious person that maybe either has or will commit a crime or is creating a disturbance, we're not approaching that person. Because we realize, regardless of who that person is, regardless of their age or their race or where they live, that impacts how they see police. Because if they know they're not doing anything wrong, and it impacts how they see our community. So we vet these calls. And I hope that's the answer to your question. Oh, yes, did I answer? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Mike, another question, Mike, I'm sorry, but this is the last one here. People came out, I want to make sure I can get to their questions. What are the standards in reporting for police use of deadly force in Milford? So the standard for using deadly force is the Supreme Court standard that's been outlined in Graham versus Connor. Now, there are a few states that have changed that, very few. That's the legal standard, and that's how it's judged. You see, when cases are judged, all the emotion goes out of the way and they look at the facts and they apply the law. We teach to that law, but we teach a more restrictive policy. And our officers get it. When I speak to these police officers in this community and I talk to them, they get it. They go, I said, you know, you're not saying anything. Do you understand? No, we get it. We agree with you. At least the vast majority do. So that's the standard, and all use of force reporting gets reported to the state, as I mentioned earlier, based upon the state's definition. Michael.
I think you've covered this already, but we'll put it all together because it's like a two-part question. How do you feel about the protests? Don't you think that maybe they've gone too far? They're hating on all cops, and do you think that's fair? End of question.
Can you say that last part again?
The person says that they feel that the protesters are hating on all police officers, and
hating.
Hating. And do you think that's fair?
Well, let me start first. I think the protests, I was glad they came to Milford. And we talked about this with our elected officials. It was peaceful. And I thought it was moving. And I thought the people that organized it did an outstanding job. And they were committed to make sure there was going to be no violence and there was going to be no destruction, and there wasn't. And I'll tell you what I shared with my police officers that day. Today we cash in on all the goodwill that we created and the good policing that we've provided. Are we absent of mistakes? Absolutely not. Are there things we could do better? Every single time. Are we perfect people? Not even close. But we have a lot to be proud of. And we have a lot, like most, that we can and are committed to doing better. But we were told by so many at that protest that how they really felt about the work that we do and about us. We all talked about that. And so I thought it was good. Look, our job as police officers is to protect people's constitutional rights. Even though that gets grade sometimes and we're put in situations that are a little different, that's how we always saw ourselves. And so why wouldn't we enjoy, or not, enjoy is the wrong word, but support the protests when people are expressing their freedom of expression and assembly. Having said that, we were certainly prepared to make sure that no one got hurt, and that there was no violence and there was no property damage. And that didn't happen here. I'll take it separate and talk about the destruction and the violence that's occurred. But that's separate from the protests. But it demonstrates how violent this society can be. I mean, one thing we do is we watch a lot of videos as well, and of police officers doing good work, police officers doing not so good work, in this case, police officers committing a crime. We also watch videos of seeing innocent people being victimized and being brutalized. Because that's why we do this, is for those, especially those disadvantaged, that can't protect themselves. That's hard to watch, right? It's all hard to watch. And so the violence, those that exploited this time to commit violence, police officers have been killed and executed and maimed, and residents have been trying to protect their businesses, have been killed and assaulted. We have to separate those two things, because if we don't, then we start making excuses again. So, and the last part of your question, hating on police or something? No, I don't. I mean, I don't at all. I think the criticisms are fair of 400 years of history, and when you look back on the experiences that some Americans and I should say some human beings have had to endure, and what that brings to that interaction, I understand the anger, and we need to understand the anger and the frustration and the call for something better. But there have been systematic injustices and inequalities in all our systems, including the criminal justice system. I'm glad that the legislators are starting to look at other things, other reasons why inequalities exist, and don't just look at police officers. And so, no, I don't think it's justified. I don't. These men and women have been just abandoned in large part, and people have turned their backs on them. Not everyone. But these are the men and women that that are going to come to your aid. And I know they care. Do I believe every single one of them care as much as they should? I'm not going to lie to you. No, I don't. But I think most in this department do. I handpick the people up here. So, but we have thick skin. We've all been called a lot. I'm sure I've been called a lot just in the locker room. But, we're okay with it. We'll make it through it. Because it isn't about us. Brian, anyone have anything they want to offer?
So I have to say, for me, you're always looking for this transformative moment in your career. And at the beginning, it's very easy because all of us enter this profession with good intentions to try to help people. As you go through the motions and the years and all the calls for service and promotions and tough times, good times, you're always looking for that moment to kind of restore some energy. And I have to say that the protests that we had out in the green here, the rally is what I like to call it because it was peaceful. It was extremely constructive, and it restored that energy that I was looking for in my career, because it really brings you back to center and kind of realizing why we are here. We're here to protect constitutional rights. We're here to do things right in this agency specifically, and I don't have any experience outside of this agency, so this is where my talking points come from. We're always looking to do things better and evolving. So that was kind of like a moment for me that was extremely powerful, extremely passionate. And going back to the question that Officer Brooks was answering, cops love to say, you don't understand, you don't have, well, we don't understand the way that dentists feel or doctors feel. So that could be said for any profession. It's up to us to have as much empathy as humanly possible for the people that we're serving before we start thinking about ourselves. So it's all kind of intertwined as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. And I see some really great comments. And this, remember something, they talk about defunding the police and turning to the community to police themselves. Well, we are the community. We're part of an authority and a government authority and an organized structure, but we are still part of the community. And we all raise children and grandchildren, and we know the world we want them to live in. And so we hope before we leave that we have an opportunity to do something. So there's a question here. I don't know if anyone else can see it. So often there's an income gap, and people can't afford to pay a minor traffic citation. Then that becomes a warrant. The person ends up arrested and in jail because they can't pay a traffic ticket. I know some of this has to do with city policies, et cetera. Well, it has to do with the state law about if you fail to pay or plead, or you don't, you don't show up for court, there are warrants issued. There's nobody more than the people up here in these uniforms that would prefer to see that not happen. Because anytime we have to interact with somebody who's already decided they don't want to go to court, or has already decided that they're not going to pay, and there are often reasons why people can't pay, because these are expensive fines. And we know that rearresting someone it's ripe for so many problems, including violence. So we don't make the laws when it comes to rearresting, when it comes to who has to pay these fines. Well, the day that society, through the legislators, say that we no longer have to make these arrests and these encounters, you're looking at one police officer who will be fine with that. A lot of these questions have to do with the beaches and things like that. So traffic citations, I just want to make sure that we have a lot of people listening in, that traffic citations for many years have been tracked in this state, and they go to the Institute at Central Connecticut. They analyze those, and those are available online. You can look at those per department, exactly why people are being stopped, what they're being stopped for, and what's been done with that. And I think that played a lot into the implicit bias that we talked about. And also, some of the things that are being considered in terms of reforms as part of this task force on transparency and education is, and this would be a good time to let everyone on the call know, because we're getting close. And that is, one of the recommendations is to, as they describe it, do away with the broken windows theory. Now, broken windows theory, those are small kind of quality of life offenses, that the premise is that you address those small issues first, and you won't see the neighborhoods. Think of the broken windows in a neighborhood. Once the windows are broken and the homes become blighted, then it brings the neighborhood down. Well, think of that analogy. Broken windows address minor crime first and quality of life stuff. And so one of the efforts, and some of what's been said out there, is to reduce those contacts between law enforcement and predominantly persons of color. Let's reduce, or let's eliminate or decriminalize some of those lower offenses. Those are offenses, traffic offenses, equipment offenses, registration, suspended registration, unregistered, suspended license, unlicensed. Those things that really impact people that who have economically, or that are more economically disadvantaged, or that are economically disadvantaged. because they can't pay for those sort of things. And that argument came up when we were talking about providing driver's license to undocuments. And so here's, I think, what's important, that not every community is created equal. And I say that in the sense that things that are important in one community may not be important in another community. You might be surprised if I told you that the number one question by far that I've been getting is, what about the beaches? What about speeding? What about loud parties? What about disturbances? What about trash? Those are things that are really important to residents. You'd probably be surprised to know that out of the estimated 3.6 or 3.7 million residents in Connecticut, and the 80% receive their primary law enforcement services from municipal police departments, the number one complaint are quality of life issues. And anyone that's in the political arena knows that. So I would say this, that those that are in positions of power, and I talk about our elected officials, that we really should opine on that. I say you really should opine, and those listening. Is that a change you want to see? Is that something your communities want? And should it look different in different communities? Probably not, because law enforcement needs to be consistent across borders. And that's one of the things that we've really been pushing for. So I think that's just something important for all the callers, the people on the call and here today can listen to. What's the role of the Milford Police Commission? Well, the Milford Police Commission is 7 members of the electorate, non-law enforcement people, that the mayor at that time will nominate. They go through they have to be, supported or voted on by the, voted on by, I was going to say confirmed, although I guess we can use confirmed, voted on by the members of the Board of Aldermen that sit up here, and then they're appointed to the Police Commission. They have authority under the, somebody help me, it's been too long. The charter, excuse me. The charter, again, my apologies. Under the charter, that they provide important and very valuable civilian oversight for the police department. Whenever there is a disciplinary issue in Milford, or somebody wants to make a complaint, it goes in front of the police commission. And they will meet, and they will ask questions, and we will present the case. And if it's an appeal, then the officer or the citizen can come in and appeal to them, and then they make a determination. They have the authority to tell me, no, not tough enough, too tough. Only they can fire someone. Only they can demote somebody. Only they can suspend someone for more than 15 days. I don't have that authority. And that's pretty consistent with most police commissions. Now, not every community has a police commission. We have one. They serve 3-year terms. That mayor, whoever is the mayor at that time, can elect to appoint them again for another term, or they can choose to pick someone else. So I hope I answered your question. They actually need to confirm everything that happens, and they can ask whatever questions they want. They're not police officers. They have no statutory authority. They have no operational control, but they oversee the administrative control of that police department, which is really kind of what we're talking about. If I run a training academy, we talk about training. They will often ask questions about training, and often ask, they're also the traffic authority. They're the ones that those things are vetted through. So I hope I answered that question. Mike, did you have any other questions here? I have some here.
Let me go back and just clarify, not the last question, but the 2 before that. In regards to the minor motor vehicle violation, which could lead to an arrest and incarceration, which is true. It is quite possible you could be pulled over and cited for a minor motor vehicle violation. And if for whatever reason, most of the time it's because of economic strife, you don't pay for it. And yes, it is possible that a rearrest warrant could be served, and it could even be served in a jurisdiction many miles from here. And you could be incarcerated in their lockup for a while and then brought to ours. That is unfortunate, but those are state laws. But let's go all the way back to the beginning. Under the chief's leadership and direction, and through the patrol division, our department utilizes what we call effective and meaningful stops. So, and that's an edict that comes down through the administration, through the patrol division. So we try to eliminate those originally. So we're just the feeling that you get and the direction that you get as police officers in the patrol division is we are the 100% opposite of any kind of a quota. We're looking for just meaningful stops that could affect quality of life or noise or speeding or accidents in an area. No interest in large numbers that have no effect on a better quality of life. So that we do our best so that we don't have, multiple occasions where we have to, go and serve these rearrest warrants on these minor motor vehicle violations.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, do we have any other questions?
Yes, next question. Does the Milford Police Department have a policy in effect where they could not hire officers, I guess would be prospective officers, with a record of brutality?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, unlike many agencies, we very, very seldom take an officer from another police department. And the staff knows, our position on this is that we want to train someone to our culture. I don't know what culture they had in another agency. We have, Bree's shaking her head, yes. Bree, you've been on how long? 3 years? 2 years? Like a year and a half. Seemed like 3 years, sorry. But, we tell them that we want to train our own people and want to train them our way to our own culture. Because I think culture is key in police departments, and it's something you have to work out every day. So the answer is no, we wouldn't. And also in the state of Connecticut, if you have pending discipline, you cannot go from one department to another. And that was passed several years ago. There are a lot of controls in place in Connecticut. Again, it doesn't eliminate the interaction between two people under stressful, unpredictable conditions that maybe sometimes really don't understand each other, unfortunately. But that control is in place. And so I don't know, and I know all the chiefs, if you're involved in misconduct, if you're involved in excessive force, you are not going to be hired here. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to lose your job, as we talked about. There are issues there, but certainly not going to be hired. So, Michael, next question.
Nationwide and statewide, the civil rights movement is calling for, and with careful planning, the abolishing of the police system and creating a new law enforcement system. The calls for abolishment also say that the good cops nationwide will be rehired onto and by specific traffic units or maybe smaller police departments, etc. If Milford's police department is reduced, how do you feel about this huge change?
Well, that's up to our elected officials and our citizens to determine whether or not they're satisfied with their policing services. I will tell you this, and I've been doing this a long time, if you do that, you're going to hire just almost everyone, not everyone, but almost everyone, you're going to want them back. And remember something, if you're talking about defunding the police, which I don't see that as a sustainable or a workable or realistic solution, if you're talking about abolishing the police, rather, you're going to transfer from one authority to another. And if you have authority that's now part of a structure, if you go to another authority, who's in charge? The strongest? The one with the weapons? I mean, I'm starting to look at, I'm really following what's going on in Seattle, because who takes charge? And whose voices are heard and whose voices aren't heard? So I say you invest in the system, you improve in the system that you have. And maybe when I talk about investment, maybe that's not investing in the police, maybe it's investing just in public safety and doing some of those things that we talked about. So I don't understand the wisdom, but again, it's not for us to decide.
My question to you is, how does this make you feel, and why would anyone want to be a cop? What are the cops saying right now about all this stuff going on? And do you think that most cops are really racist? I really don't think that's true, but how do you feel?
No, I don't think most cops are racist. In fact, I've been around a little bit, and I've been in policing, and I've served in 2 branches of the military. I've lived in other countries. I believe, and I know there'll be many that disagree with me on this call, that police officers that I've been exposed to are the least racist people that I know. And I grew up, I'm 61 years old. I grew up in a very different time where we use very different words and very different terms. And it's shameful when you think about, many years ago. And so I know these men and women. I don't know them enough to know what's truly in their heart, but I know these men and women, and I don't think that. And if I thought that, they wouldn't work here. I'm sorry, call me with the first part again. Mike, I'm sorry, can you give me the first part of that question?
Yes. It's actually a question that's asked quite a bit. What are the police officers currently saying about what's going on right now, and why would anyone want to be a police officer?
Right. I think I just showed my age. I think you knew that because you can see I can't remember. So, years ago I would have been like, so here's what I said after some of the police, these demonstrations and issues and men and women dying at the hands of police. Justified or unjustified, and at some point it really doesn't matter, because it's what it does to society and how it makes us feel about our systems and equality. And so we've had some tough times, if you recall. Ferguson was a really tough time. And we can't get people. We used to get 1,000 people wanting to take this job for 10 positions. And we lose 80%. We just can't get people. People don't want to do this job, but here's what we said. Remember this? The bad news is, boy, it's a tough time to be a cop. But the good news is, it's a tough time to be a cop. And so, if you really don't want this job, then don't take it. It's challenging, and it's not fun right now. It doesn't matter some of the things that we've been experiencing, but it's not fun, right? But either we're committed to this job and we're in it for the long haul, whether, the good and the bad. I see it as a challenge, and I think I want everyone else to see it as a challenge as well. Absent that, are there any of my colleagues up here that want to answer that further? And you don't need to expand on my answer, but.
I think we as police need to also remember kind of the reason we started in the first place. If you stand in front of any academy class, one of the first icebreaker questions we ask is, why do you want to be a police officer? And the questions are always, to be a pillar in my community, to be a positive influence, to help people. That's why we're doing this. And if that's why you still want to be a police officer, then this is the field you should get into.
Anyone else? Oh, thank you.
So growing up for me, it was a different time. When September 11th happened, police were looked at more positively, and that's kind of what led me to this profession. So I think people growing up today are going to have to, like what Lieutenant Del Monte say, it's really on those pillars of them wanting to be part of the community. For me, I want to help people. That's why I got into the job. And sometimes it's tough, especially nowadays. You listen to a lot of negative things that people are saying about police officers. But it's important for us to just kind of not think about those things, but kind of put it past you, because you know you're in this for the right reason. And if you help 1 or 2 people a shift, you're still doing the job that you wanted to do.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say something. We don't have a singular identity any more than you do. And so we are moms and dads and brothers and sisters. So that's who we are. We do this as a job because we believe in it. But it doesn't define us as human beings. It defines what's important to us and what we do for a living. But, we all have the same feelings. And, for anyone to suggest that that we weren't completely, just taken aback and disgusted and horrified by what happened. But I also want to just add, I forgot, you talked about we talked about bringing officers from other departments in, and I forgot that Officer Anania was in Guilford. And I'm going to take a plug for us for a second because, and I won't mention the department, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, she decided she wanted to transfer to another department. And she was going to another department. Her chief called me and said, I know you don't take people from other departments, but this woman is a star. And I called her in and I said, I hope I don't get this wrong. I don't want you to leave, but if you're going to leave, you need to go to Milford. Is that pretty close to what happened? So I forgot she is from another agency, or she was, but she's ours now. So we have time for one more question, a quick question, because I have to wrap up. Did I kind of hit most of the questions? Because I need a couple minutes to wrap up. Can I wrap up?
Yes, you can wrap up.
All right. I apologize if I didn't hit your question, but I just want to leave on a positive note. I hope, I've asked everyone to come here tonight to demonstrate our commitment to this city and to this profession. I know that's not something that people want to hear right now, but you really have cause to be proud of the men and women here in this department. And we're up for the challenge. Hold us accountable. Have high expectations. We're okay with that. Our door is always open. We're proud of the fact that we were one of the first departments, I think the very first in the department in the state to get body cameras, because we always believed in recording everything we did, both to hold people accountable, but we did it because we wanted to get better. I want to know what my officers are doing, and I want to be able to say, look, look at yourself. We could have done that better. It's about continuous improvement. We're fortunate to work in this city. It's a great community. It's a tolerant community, and I'm proud to be here, and I know they're proud to be here as well. So, with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you for those that have listened in. And to ask the question, are we going to do this again? If you want us to do it, we'll do it. And maybe we will do it where we can all actually sit next to each other. All right. With that, good night, everyone. Thank you. Mayor, thank you for coming and sitting tonight. I really appreciate it. Chris, Justin.